Welcome to JonGetsGames. Today I'll be reviewing Archaeology. In this 2 to 5 player game, you will be digging through ruins trying to make sets of various valuable treasure, as well as visiting the market to swap your treasure out and trying to make sure you don't have all that treasure in your hand when the sandstorm sweeps through and knocks it out. First I'll go over the rules and then I'll jump into my review. Here's the starting setup for Archaeology. We have some face-up cards in an open public market. We have a specific destination that we will be excavating. There are 5 other ones in the game. You're going to choose one of these randomly at the beginning. We've got specific piles of excavatable cards associated with that location. Each player starts with a tent and 4 cards. The structure of a turn is quite simple. You simply draw the top card from the deck, put it into your hand, and then you can take a couple different actions. The first of these is a market action. You can send any number of the cards in your hand to the market in order to take cards from the market and put them back in your hand at a 1-to-1 ratio between the value of the cards. So you'll see all these cards have value 1, but then we do happen to have this one talisman card that's a value 3. So potentially we could put 3 value worth of cards in the market in order to pull up this other talisman into our hand. So for instance, we might take these 2 pot shards, put those down, and then throw 1 parchment paper down. That is 3 value, and now this talisman comes up into my hand. I can keep trading with the market as much as I want to until I choose to stop, and I can also choose to sell my cards to a museum as many times as I want in a turn. And when you do that, you put it down in front of you as a set, and you get victory points at the end of the game equal to the number of cards in that specific suit, I guess. We have the talisman here, and we can tell that there are 8 of these cards in the entire deck. And we see that with only 2 of these cards, it's going to be worth 10 points. But if I hold on and wait to get maybe 3 or 4 of these cards, it's going to be worth 20, 32, or even 45 points if I got 5 of these cards, which is hard to do, but that's a really big benefit. So I might want to hold off and not quite cash in yet and try to get those 10 points and hold these into my hand. Once you're done taking actions, your turn is over and you pass it to the player on your left. Once it comes back around to you, you once again draw a card, and it might be a map card. These are special. You'll see there are 6 of these in the deck, but you'll notice that there is no good sell value to the museum. You could sell it for 3 points, but these are special. These are the ways that you are going to be excavating the different sites, in this case, the Great Pyramid. We see down here on this specific site, it costs 1 map card in order to draw the 2-card excavation pile, which is this one up here. I could wait and get 2 map cards in order to draw this 5-card excavation pile, or 3 map cards to get 8 cards from here. So it's really worth it. Do I want to wait or just cash out now? It's important to note that you can't visit the location more than once on a turn. So if I had 3 map cards, I couldn't go 1 and then 2 on the same turn. So let's just say I did that. I would spend the map card, I would actually discard it from the game, and in this case I would take this stack of 2, it would get added into my hand. It's a couple more 1 values, and yeah, then we keep going, and this does not get replenished, so this will only get hit 3 times, but as I said, there are 6 cards in the deck, and as you can see, this is a way to use all 6 of them. At this point, let's say that we're done, and the next player takes a turn, and they draw this card right here. It is a thief. Now what that player is going to do is they're going to steal a random card from a specific opponent's hand. So they might look to my hand and they're going to grab 1 card and they will put that into their hand. Oh, look, it's just a 1 value pot shard. That's not too big a deal. It kind of sucks for us. We lost one of our cards, but they didn't get that much out of it. Once it gets back around to us, we might potentially draw this card right here, a sandstorm. So there are a number of these in the deck based off the number of players. In a 3-player game, there would be 5, for instance. And when a sandstorm happens, you actually discard it off to the side, and then everybody loses half their hand. But fortunately, they are going to be rounding in favor of the players. So if you only have 1 card, you're not going to lose that 1 card. But in this case, I have 4 cards, so I would need to lose half. And when you lose them, they actually go to the market. So in this case, I'd probably keep my high value cards, and I'd send these 2 cards over to the market. So I think the idea is that they get knocked out of your area and blown across the desert, and some merchants pick them up. But it's important to note, I could have also discarded my tent. 1 time in the game, you can discard it, and it will counteract all the effects of a sandstorm. So you want to use this when you have a really nice hand and you don't want to discard anything. Once everybody's evaluated the sandstorm, the person who drew it gets to draw another card into their hand. You should know that these sandstorms are shuffled throughout the deck, so it is possible to have sandstorms happen back to back. So just for the sake of an example, at this point, I might decide to sell to the museum. I could put these talismans down here, and that would be worth 10 points. I wasn't picking up any more, and it is important to know that if I get any future talismans into my hand, I cannot add them into the stack. It's already sold. I would need to either make a new talisman set or potentially trade them into the market to pick other stuff up. It's important to know that if you look at this parchment scraps, which are pretty low value, if you have 4 of them, it's also worth 10 points. And that's only 4 value, whereas if you look at this, that's 10 points for 6 value. So it's not the worst thing in the world
to potentially do a big sell to the museum with the cheaper goods like the parchment scraps or these pot shards. So the game will keep playing until this entire draw deck runs out, and then you'll actually keep playing until everybody has played all the cards in their hands into these tableaus in front of them, selling them to museums. It's also good to know that there is the highest value card in the game. There's only 4 of them, but it's this Pharaoh's Mask with a 4 value, but most of the cards in the games are these 1 and 2 value cards. At that point, each player will count up all the victory points they have. You don't get any bonus points for not using your tent, and whoever has the most wins. I'd like to briefly go over the other expedition targets that you can do because the Great Pyramids is honestly the most boring one. There is the Mine, which actually brings in a bit of a push your luck game where you are drawing cards from the top, but if you ever draw a value of too high, you could bust and lose everything. There is the Sphinx, which is a bit of a guessing game where you are going to draw treasures from the stack, but you have to ask for a specific type of card and then you get all of that card that you got. The Buried Ruins actually starts out with nothing on the stacks, but the stacks get higher and higher as the more sandstorms come in, which I guess, brush off the Buried Ruins. The Tomb is interesting because it lets you look at all the cards, but just keep 2 of them, so it's really nice. You get to dig deep and grab only the ones you really want. And then lastly, the Temple is a little bit like the Great Pyramids. You just get the cards from the stack, but you're going to know more about it because every time you sell to the museum with one of your sets, you get to peek at one of these stacks and see what's inside of it.
So now let's begin the review for Archaeology, and we'll start with a couple positive points. The first of these relates to the various dig site options that you have for the game. There are 6 of them, and you'll choose one at the beginning when you're setting up, and it will dictate how the game plays because they have different mechanics to them. Some will have, one has a push your luck mechanism as you are drawing cards and you can stop or bust, and others require you to collect larger sets of maps, and some just you need 1 map and you can look through the various things, and there's a good variety of added mechanics that these little tombs bring into the game so that at least the first 6 times you play the game, there will be some variance between the plays. Positive number 2 is that I really like the mechanics of the market. It's a great idea where you can trade cards out freely from your hand to try and upgrade or even sometimes put a big card in and grab a bunch of low value ones. And I also like that the Sandstorm knocks cards out of your hand, but it puts them into the market to try and see the market so that there's more interesting options there. Realistically, this is where most of the actual decisions come from the game is how you trade your cards into the market, and also maybe doing a little bit of counting, trying to figure out how many of a card you have in your hand, how many you see in the market, and try to figure out if there's more in the deck or if they're in other people's hands. You need to decide, do I try to do that trade or do I just cash out now and sell my set to the museum? It's a pretty cool idea. Now let's move into my one neutral point, which has to do with the sandstorms and the thieves that randomly come out as you're playing the game. They offer a really nice deterrent to building a big hand. Like, that is where all the push your luck comes from, is you're trying to get a bunch of cards to have these really great sets, but when you cash out so that a sandstorm doesn't come through and knock half your hand out, or a thief comes through and somebody randomly takes the exact card you need. What I've seen happen is the threat of the sandstorm in particular has oftentimes been worse than the effects of it actually happening. There have been a couple games where we end the game and a couple people still have the tent in front of them because every time a sandstorm hit, they were either at 0 or 1 cards, or maybe they had 3 cards and they were really bad cards because there are tons of these low value cards in their hand, and they're like, well, I'm going to save my tent and just lose this 1 pot shard. I'm sure later on in the game I'll need to discard my tent when I'll have a much better hand, and then they never get a much better hand, and the game ends, and they're like, okay, well, I guess I never used my tent, and that's a bit of a bummer. So it's a little weird. I think that the threat of the sandstorm and the thief is a good thing, but the bark seems a little bit louder than the bite from my experience. All right, now let's shift into my negative points, and unfortunately, there are several of them. The first of these relates to your turn and how uninteresting most of the turns are in this game. It seems like over half of this game is spent when it comes down to your turn. You draw a card, and you pass. And it comes back around to you, draw a card, and you pass. Sometimes you have something interesting to do with that market where you could like trade a card out to get something in, and maybe you do and you cash out like your whole hand, and guess what? Now you're going to be coming around to you, draw a card, you have 1 card, you pass. You comes back around, you draw a card, you have 2 cards, you pass. Fast forward like 3 or 4 more turns, you draw a card, maybe this is your 5th or 6th card, you can finally do something, but what if there's a sandstorm the moment you drew that 1 good card, and man, so many turns in this game are completely uninteresting and just bored me. And I want to be excited about the card I drew, and it seemed like more often than not you draw a pot shard or a parchment scrap, and they are bad. Like, in general, they're not good at anything. Sure, you can get 5 of them and it'll cash out to 15 points, but that is quite a lot of them, and that in and of itself isn't interesting. Having a hand of 5 parchment scraps and then playing it to get 15 points, that's not interesting, and now you have no cards in your hand, so you're doomed to like 4 or 5 more hands of drawing a card and doing nothing. I think this is a pretty big problem with the game. Negative number 2 relates specifically to luck of the draw. You have good cards and you have bad cards. It seems like in general, you're going to be drawing bad cards and having really uninteresting turns like I already talked about, but there are a couple cards in this deck that are really good, like the Pharaoh's Mask, in particular, those map cards. I've seen games where where one person does not get any map cards, and in general, if you don't draw map cards, you're not going to win. And the reason for that is the way you get cards in general in the game is you get 1 card per turn, pretty much no matter what. But if you are able to cash in a map card, you might get 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 cards. Now, in order to get that many, it's likely that you're going to need multiple map cards, but again, luck of the draw. If you are able to get a couple of these and you drop them down and get that huge influx, you've essentially bought like 4 turns worth of power for happening to draw the correct cards into your hand. And the people who are not happening to draw those correct cards in their hand, they're powerless to do anything about that. And oftentimes the people who draw the more maps seem to steamroll their way to victory. Or I've seen situations where I was actually playing the game. I had 1 Pharaoh's Mask. I pulled up a thing from a tomb and I pulled up 2 Pharaoh's Masks. So I plopped all 3 of them down and I just destroyed that game. I think I doubled the score of the second place person. So it really seems like card draw luck is the biggest determining factor to how you're going to do in this game, and I don't really enjoy that. And lastly, negative number 3 has to do with the component quality of the game, specifically that deck of cards. I found that it seems like not all the cards are exactly the same size. They're just slightly different, but it's different enough to make doing a standard ruffle shuffle quite difficult. And it's not just me. I've asked several people that I play games with who know how to shuffle cards to try and give it a shuffle, and it seems to kind of chunk and really not go well. And because as you're playing the game, you are sorting all these things into these stacks, it means shuffling is really important. So we've ended up having to kind of smush it on the table and fit it back together again. I haven't heard about anybody else having this problem with the game. Maybe it's just my copy, but it's definitely been an annoyance. So now let's discuss Archaeology's replayability, and I think it's above average, especially for a small card game like this, and that's entirely on the back of the fact that there are 6 different modes of play with those 6 different ruins that you can go in and excavate. I think that you will get quite a bit of replayability from those 6 right there because you could play each of them twice and now you've played the game 12 times. Of course, you need to enjoy the game in order to get that amount of replayability out, but I think from a mechanical perspective, the replayability is quite good. Now let's discuss the different player counts that Archaeology supports. It's a 2 to 5 player game, and I've only played the 3 and 4 player game, and honestly this is kind of tough because I have not enjoyed it at either of those player counts, and I am willing to bet that it's not that great at 2 or 5, and I think it's probably best with 4, probably because you have greater card variety, but you are not having the longest time before it comes back around you. I think 5 is probably a really bad idea because, as I said before, most turns are boring, so the more actions between you getting another boring turn is probably a poor thing. But at a 3-player game, there's less different types of stuff that you can find in the deck. You actually remove entire suits of stuff from the deck based on the player count. So 3 worked okay. I think 4 is probably best, and 2 I imagine is really not that great. I mean, sure, your boring turns are hitting over and over again, but there are a ton of sandstorms and thieves in there. And I think that losing the variety of those extra decks is going to hurt it even more at those player counts. So unfortunately, this probably isn't going to help you out too much, but I think that 4 is probably the best. In conclusion, I've been really disappointed by this game. I had somewhat high hopes going into it because I like light push-your-luck card games, and this definitely seemed to fit the bill. Many people have given it very good reviews online, so I was expecting to at least not dislike it so much. And what I found is that it fell flat every single time I played it. The mixture of really boring turns where you're just drawing a card and usually doing nothing, and then you combine into that the card draw luck that you might be doing these boring card draws and then also not drawing good cards, made it just not fun. I felt like there was the illusion of decisions with the market, and I like the idea of the market, but in actuality I found that you had to draw cards that would work for the market, and it just didn't end up being as interesting as I wanted it to be. I will admit that I think I disliked this game more than anybody else I played it with, but I don't think anybody I played it with left the table being like, whoa, that was fun. The best thing I heard from anybody was, oh, that was okay, I'd try that again. And for me, I don't anticipate ever playing this game again. It was such a flop for me, and I know that it was a fast playing game, like it's like 15-20 minutes, but I think I would rather spectate my friends playing any other game than play this again because it was just so dull and uninteresting. And I'm not going to beat a dead horse here. I definitely don't recommend this game. I think I am in the minority on that for some reason, but that's the way it's played out for me. If you'd like to see more in-depth board game reviews like this one, as well as full game playthroughs and vlogs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, you can directly support the channel at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.